Hi, BookTube, and welcome to a new video. This is that most rare beast from me these days, which is a tag video. I was tagged by Brian of Bookish. The original tag was by Doris at Aldi Books, and I'll post links to both of their videos. And this is the What Makes an Author Great tag. And yeah, I mean, Brian, I can't remember if he did this as part of the tag or no. I think the way this worked is Brian did a discussion video about what makes an author great, and in response to that, Doris drew up this tag with the prompts, and then Brian did the tag. I think that's how it worked. Anyway, thank you, Brian. This one intrigued me enough that I thought I'd do it, even though I can't remember the last time I did a tag, probably almost a year ago. You'll have to forgive me, I've got the prompts on a laptop. I do not own a smartphone, so I can't do that most people do, so there'll be a lot of head turning towards the screen to read the prompt, but also I've got books everywhere because great authors have bibliographies that are more than one book to hold up, so you just have to indulge me in that. So prompt 1, a great author whose work you've read in their entirety. Well, I think the easiest way to do this is to choose an author who's dead and had a limited output. So we can consider Franz Kafka, who to me indubitably is a great author. I've read all of these. I've even read the short stories twice in 2 different editions, which are not quite the same short stories. Last year, the lost writings of Franz Kafka from his notebooks, so they're never even typed out until this came out, and I devoured this eagerly. So I think Kafka is a good way to go for this particular question. And then you've got someone like Clarice Lispector, definitely a great author, favourite of mine. I still have one of her novels still to go, but I haven't read her short stories because I'm not really reading short stories these days. So I'm not, certainly at this point I can't say I've read everything by her, but even unto my deathbed, will I be in a position to say I've read everything by her? I don't know. Similarly, Michel Houellebecq, which in some ways alarms me that he could be an answer for this. As you can see, I've read all of his fictional output. I haven't read his non-fiction. His last book last year was non-fiction. I haven't read it. And I say alarming because Houellebecq, it's debatable whether he's a great author. I like him. I'm not sure I'd call him a great author. I think at times he phones it in. But if you see how many of these are hardbacks, once I discovered him, so I discovered him with Platform, which is his sort of breakout novel, and then went back to a couple of sort of earlier versions, Whatever and Elementary Particles, which are sort of variations of Platform. Sorry, Atomize, and there's Platform. But then, each time a new book came out, and they were always a year after because they had to be translated, so that was aggravating. Bang, straight off the press in hardback. So I spent a lot of money on Houellebecq, and I'm not sure, the cold light of day, that's been the most sensible course of action. But it is what it is. Another author, I haven't read everything by her, and indeed I have another one of hers from her back catalogue to go to. That is Jeanette Winterson. Big fan of Jeanette Winterson, and her last one, Frankenstein, which, as you can see, is in hardback. Whereas all of these, I came to after the event. Once I read my first, actually, I've never read Origins of the Early Fruit, which is her breakout book. And the reason I haven't read it is because it seems to be quite autobiographical and less artistic and poetic than these are, which is what I really like about her writing. So, in fact, unless I pick that up, I can't say truthfully that I will have read all of her output. And even the one I've got to read, I can't remember what it's called now, when I read that, I'm still not convinced that I would have read everything except Orange is Not the Only Fruit, because with Winterson it's quite hard to somehow keep tabs of her writing, because she does all these sort of projects where she's commissioned to write books as part of sort of thematic sort of fiction imprints and all that sort of stuff. So I have actually read Jeanette Winterson's 2 autobiographical books, not Oranges of the Only Fruit. One was called Why Be Happy When You Could Be. I'll post the link to it because it's a brilliant book, and it's her search for her true mother because she was adopted. and her adoptive mother was this sort of mad religious figure, which you would know if you'd read Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, which I haven't. And of course, the piece de resistance. I haven't quite read everything by this guy, because one of these I still have to read. That is David Markson, my favourite author. A guy who had 3 different types of or stages or phases of his career. The 1960s, when he was sort of writing commissioned work, almost pulp fiction. Not, I mean, having read it, I'd say it's more literary than pulp, but you know, that lurid cover. This is the one from the 60s I haven't read yet, The Ballad of Dingus McGee. I'll get to that this year. Then we have 2 novels of his from the 1970s, which are, you know, serious literary fiction. Springer's Progress, which is very funny in a riot, but very much of its time. And then completely polar opposite, serious, no laughs at all in this, Going Down. And then the late 1990s into the early 2000s, we had his, what are called his notebook or shoebox quartet, after Wittgenstein's Mistress, which was the sort of the text that told you he was going in a different direction. This Is Not a Novel and Other Novels, and Reader's Block. Just my favourite books in the world. And I've even read letters from David Markson to the poet Laura Sims, who's a self-confessed fangirl, and started this correspondence with him. So I haven't quite read all of David Markson. I hope to by the end of this year. As you can see, as I say, books flying everywhere. Some of these are quite precious to me, so I really ought to treat them better. I think that will do for a great author whose works I've read in their entirety. Prompt 2, a great author who's a one-hit wonder. Can you be a great author with just one hit? I think Brian's argument that prompted all of this is that you probably can't. You need to have a bit of a body of work behind you. But that I have a perfect example, and that is Carew by Steve Tessick. And the reason this is a great book, and I think he would have gone on to be a great author, but he died. He only ever produced this one book. He had a career in Hollywood, in filmmaking. This was his first novel set in the world of filmmaking. And it's a riot. It's very, very funny. It's brilliant. Unfortunately, though, it was the only book he produced, and a one-hit. Is he a one-hit wonder? How many people have heard of Steve Tessick and have read Carew? Probably, I don't know. Probably not that many. So maybe it fails on, you know, on those terms. Prompt 3, a great author who's had a flop or 2. Okay, so Anthony Mara, whose first 2 books are brilliant. A Constellation of Vital Phenomena and The Tsar of Love and Techno. And then last year we got his 3rd book, his new book, Mercury Pictures Presents, and it was terrible. So it's definitely a flop. I really hope his 4th book is going to get back to the level of these 2, but we'll have to see. Equally, one of my absolute favourite writers, Laurent Binet, the French author, HHHH, genius, The Seventh Functional Language, hilarious, one of the funniest books I've ever read. And then 3 years ago, his follow-up Civilizations, which was just dreck. Absolutely pointless book. He writes historical fiction from the inside, i.e. looking at the nature of historical fiction, what makes it historical, what makes it fiction, how much is reliable, all these sorts of stuff. And this is very much in the vein, but unlike these 2, which were sort of philosophically dealing with these big questions about history and preservation of record, this was absolutely unanchored. It was a speculative alternative history, which I couldn't see any point to whatsoever. 4, a great author you read when you were young. Kafka. Albert Camus was the author who got me into reading at the age of 14, so either of those dudes. A great author whose works are considered classics. I don't really understand this question. I know a book that should be called a classic, and I'm including it because I know it would annoy Steve Donoghue. That is Mark Danielewski's House of Leaves. Interestingly, he could be considered for flops. The rest, you know, having had flops, although to be fair, I haven't finished his book Only Revolutions. I've been absolutely ground down. Come to a grinding halt in it. I don't think it's a great book. But, you know, I haven't read enough of his other output to be able to sort of say, A, that he's a great writer, B, that they're modern classics, and C, that he's had flops. So I'm just really throwing this in as a provocation to Steve Donoghue, really. 6. A great author of the cutting edge novel. I refer to my earlier answer of David Markson, particularly This Is Not a Novel, my favourite book, and very cutting edge. 7. A great author whose work you consider impactful. I'm not sure I can answer that, really. Impactful in what way? Changing the way society thinks and operates? I can't think, Harriet Beecher Stowe, was she a great novelist? No. Did it have impact? Yes. Yeah, I can't really answer that. A great author of non-fiction. I don't read a huge amount of non-fiction. I have just ordered an Annie Dillard novel, work in non-fiction, which I am really looking forward to, but it's late. Come on, eBay supplier. It better get here. It's due here on Friday. So I'm really looking forward to reading that. And that, I think she can be considered possibly a great non-fiction writer, but I haven't read her, so who am I to judge? The other one is, I'm in two minds about this, and that is Jared Kobeck. And the reason I'm in two minds is because he's also a great fiction writer. So I Hate the Internet is a work of fiction. Do Everything Wrong, XXX Nation Against the World is non-fiction and a brilliant study of a Florida hip-hop star who's basically consumed by his upbringing and the industry. Atta is a wonderful novel on the leader of the 9/11 bombers, hijackers. It is definitely fiction, but it's a brilliant study of that one man's personality. Other novels, but the two books I read last year are definitively non-fiction, both on the Zodiac Killer, Motor Spirit and How to Find Zodiac, and these are supremely good. If ever you want to get inside the mind of, you do get inside the mind of a serial killer, but that's not what I was going to say. If ever you want to get in the mind of a writer's absolute forensic drive to to sniff out every single source, document and clue as to somebody's personality, these books are superlative. But he also writes great fiction, so he's not definitively a non-fiction writer. 9. A great author you just don't enjoy reading. I'm going to have to say Jane Austen for this, which I know will probably get me to hand in my BookTube membership card. I had to read her at school. I could appreciate she was a great stylist, a supreme stylist, but her books do not speak to me. But there again, the 19th century Victorian canon doesn't speak to me. Those are not where my interests lie. And they're sort of slightly antiquated version of stylistic writing, while I can acknowledge its worth and its supreme skill, it's not what interests me about language, which is much more, I suppose, sort of postmodern experimental thing. And finally, a great author you have reread or want to reread soon. I don't reread very much at all, and if I do, it's specific books rather than authors. So I've read all of William Burroughs' canon. Actually, that was another person I could have answered for, having completely read. But the only one of his I want to reread is, well, I say one, is his trilogy, Cities of the Red Knight, The Place of Dead Roads, and the Western, whatever it's called. I do want to reread those, but I don't want to reread everything of Burroughs. Equally, Murakami, who is not a great writer, but he did write one fantastic book, in my mind, called Hardboiled Wonderland and the End of the World. I do want to reread that at some point. But as I say, I'm not a great rereader. If I do reread, it tends not to be on an author basis. It's on an individual book basis. So there you have it. There's my answers to what makes an author great. Thanks to Brian and Doris for the tag. And till next time, but probably not till next tag. Take care.